The hotshot lawyer my wife left me for tried to intimidate me. He forgot I wrote the book on interrogation. People always ask me what it feels like to break someone in an interrogation room. They expect stories about shouting, about slamming tables, about getting in someone's face until they crack. But that's not how it works. Real interrogation is silent. It's surgical. You find the truth not by pushing harder, but by creating a space where lies become too heavy to hold. I learned that over 23 years with the FBI. I sat across from serial killers, domestic terrorists, corrupt politicians, and cartel enforcers. I learned to read the microscopic movements of facial muscles, the barely perceptible shift in posture that telegraphs discomfort, the way a person's pupils dilate when you touch a nerve they didn't know was exposed. I became a specialist in the architecture of deception, and by the time I was 50, I'd broken cases that made headlines and put dangerous criminals away for life. Then I retired. Or semi-retired, anyway. I started teaching occasional seminars for law enforcement, corporate fraud investigators, that sort of thing. But mostly I wrote. I'd been working on a textbook for years, a comprehensive guide to advanced interrogation techniques and behavioral analysis. The Anatomy of Truth, I called it. It was my magnum opus, the distillation of everything I'd learned about human psychology under pressure. My wife, Chloe, didn't see it that way. To her, retirement meant I'd given up. She'd loved being married to the legendary FBI interrogator, the man whose name made criminals nervous. She loved the status, the danger, the stories she could tell at dinner parties. When I stepped back to write and teach, she saw it as surrender. She told me I'd become boring, that I'd lost my edge, that she needed someone who was still in the game. 6 months after I turned 55, she left me for Julian Thorne. Julian was everything I wasn't, at least on the surface. A high-profile defense attorney in his late 40s, tall and charismatic, with a courtroom presence that could sway juries and intimidate prosecutors. He specialized in impossible cases, guilty clients with mountains of evidence against them, and somehow he won. Every single time. His reputation was spotless, his success rate was extraordinary, and his fee structure was astronomical. Chloe moved into his penthouse apartment overlooking the city. She started appearing in society pages again, always on his arm, always smiling that dazzling smile. She got what she wanted. Excitement, status, a man who was still playing the game at the highest level. And I went back to my quiet townhouse, to my manuscript, to my Saturday morning runs, and my occasional lectures to rooms full of young investigators who still thought the job was about being tough. People thought I was broken, washed up, the cuckolded ex-husband, too passive to even fight for his marriage. I could see it in their eyes when they talked to me, pity mixed with a little contempt. Even my former colleagues seemed embarrassed for me. They didn't understand. I wasn't broken. I was simply observing. Because here's the thing about Julian Thorne's perfect record. Nobody's that good. Nobody wins every case legitimately, especially not cases where the evidence is overwhelming. I'd spent 2 decades studying liars, and Julian's success had the distinct pattern of something constructed, not earned. So I did what I do best. I investigated. Not officially, of course. I had no badge anymore, no authority. But I had something better, a network of contacts spanning law enforcement, intelligence agencies, and the criminal justice system. I had analytical skills honed by thousands of hours reading people's deepest secrets. And I had time. I started with his cases. I pulled trial transcripts, studied his victories, mapped the patterns. I looked for the tells, not in his courtroom performance, but in the underlying structures of his wins. And slowly a picture emerged. Witnesses who changed their stories at the last minute. Key evidence that mysteriously became inadmissible. Prosecutors who made uncharacteristic mistakes. Nothing obvious, nothing provable on its own. But when you've been reading human behavior as long as I have, you develop an instinct for when something's been manipulated. I focused on one case in particular, a serious criminal trial from 3 years ago. A wealthy businessman named Marcus Delacroix had been accused of a violent crime against his business partner. The evidence was damning, forensics motive opportunity. Open and shut. But the prosecution's star witness, a junior analyst who'd overheard Delacroix planning the crime, suddenly recanted on the stand. Claimed she'd been mistaken. The case collapsed. Delacroix walked. I tracked down that witness. Her name was Sandra Cho, and she'd moved to Portland shortly after the trial. It took me 2 months to locate her, another month to build enough trust for her to talk to me. She told me everything over coffee in a quiet cafe, her hands shaking as she held her cup. Julian had approached her through an intermediary. No direct contact, nothing traceable. But the message was clear. Change your testimony. Receive $200,000 in an offshore account. Refuse, and certain personal information, compromising photos from her college years, would be sent to her employer and family. She'd taken the money. She'd lived with the guilt ever since. Marcus Delacroix, who she was certain had committed the crime, was living freely in Monte Carlo while she had nightmares about the victim's family. I recorded our conversation with her permission. Then I went deeper. The payment to Sandra had been laundered through 3 shell companies, but the trail was there if you knew where to look. And I did. I'd worked financial crimes early in my career. I understood how dirty money moved. The shells led to a law firm in Panama, which led to a consulting group in Luxembourg, which finally connected to an account that, while not directly in Julian's name, was controlled by a trust he benefited from. It took me 8 months, but I built a case. Not just against Julian, but against his entire pattern of corruption. I found 2 other witnesses he'd tampered with, including one from a case that had led a repeat violent offender back onto the streets, a man who'd gone on to harm 2 more people. I documented everything. Bank records. Witness statements. Communication logs. The kind of evidence that doesn't just suggest wrongdoing, it proves it beyond reasonable doubt. The kind of case I used to build for federal prosecutors. And then I waited. I wasn't angry. That might surprise you. I wasn't plotting revenge out of some wounded masculine pride or heartbreak over losing Chloe. The truth is, by the time I'd finished my investigation, I'd realized that losing her was the best thing that had ever happened to me. She'd wanted a performance, a show of power and status. I'd wanted peace, depth, work that mattered. We were never compatible. I'd just been too busy chasing monsters to notice. But Julian was different. Julian was a man who'd corrupted the justice system for profit. He'd put dangerous people back on the streets. He'd intimidated victims and witnesses. And he'd done it all with such confidence, such arrogance, because he believed his intelligence and verbal agility made him untouchable. I wanted to see what happened when someone like that met someone who actually understood how power worked. The opportunity came at the Hastings Gallery charity auction. It was one of those glittering social events where the city's elite gathered to bid on overpriced art and congratulate themselves on their philanthropy. I normally avoided such things, but the proceeds were going to a victims' rights organization, and they'd asked me to attend as a former FBI agent who'd advocated for victims throughout my career. I was standing near a sculpture of twisted bronze, nursing a glass of wine I had no intention of drinking when I saw them. Julian and Chloe, holding court near the center of the gallery. She wore a red dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, her laugh carrying across the room. He stood beside her, confident and commanding, surrounded by admirers, judges, politicians, business moguls, the kind of people who confused wealth with wisdom. They spotted me. I could see the moment of recognition, the brief conference between them, and then Julian's smile, that calculated predatory smile, as he took Chloe's elbow and steered her toward me. The crowd around them followed, sensing drama. Mark. Julian's voice was warm, friendly, with just an undertone of condescension. I didn't expect to see you here. Still giving those lectures, are you? He stopped about 6 feet away, his body language open and relaxed, but positioned to dominate the space. He was taller than me by 3 inches, broader in the shoulders, and he used every inch of that physical presence. It was a courtroom tactic, make yourself bigger, control the geography of the interaction. I teach occasionally, I said quietly, when the work interests me. Chloe mentioned you're writing a book. How quaint. His eyes swept over me, cataloging and dismissing. A memoir, I assume? Tales from the interrogation room. That sort of thing. A textbook, actually, on behavioral analysis and interrogation techniques. Ah. He smiled more broadly now, playing to his audience. Well, I hope it's more successful than, how shall I put this delicately, than your recent personal endeavors. A few people laughed. Chloe looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Julian stepped closer, lowering his voice, but not enough that the observers couldn't hear. I want you to know, Mark, there are no hard feelings on my part. What happened between Chloe and me, well, these things happen. Adults move on. I'm sure you understand. I do, I said. Good. Good. He nodded, then his tone shifted, becoming more serious. But I want to be clear about something. I know how these situations can become complicated. Ex-husbands sometimes struggle with closure. They make trouble, file frivolous lawsuits, spread rumors, make accusations. There it was, the threat wrapped in concern. I wouldn't want to see you go down that path, Mark. You have to understand, I have resources you can't imagine. Legal resources. If you were to, say, make any allegations about me or attempt any sort of harassment, I could bury you in motions, depositions, discovery requests. I could make your life a labyrinth of legal proceedings. I know you probably don't understand all the legal terminology, but trust me when I say you don't want that kind of attention. You seem like a man who values his quiet life. Let's keep it that way, shall we? The crowd had grown silent, watching. This was entertainment for them, the powerful attorney putting the retired cop in his place. I stayed perfectly still, my wine glass held loosely in my hand, and I looked at him. Just looked. Counted 4 heartbeats. Let the silence expand until it became uncomfortable. Then I spoke, my voice soft and curious. Why would you assume I'd make trouble, Julian? He blinked. What? That's a very specific threat for a general situation. We're at a charity auction. I haven't said or done anything to suggest I have any interest in your life. Yet you felt compelled to come over here and warn me off from what, exactly? It's a fundamental interrogation technique. Make the subject explain their own aggression. Put the burden of rationalization on them. Julian had come over here to intimidate me, but now he had to justify why intimidation was necessary. I'm not concerned about anything, he said, his smile tightening. I'm simply being proactive. About what? I tilted my head slightly, my expression open and genuinely curious. What specific action are you concerned I might take? I'm simply making sure we have an understanding. An understanding about what? About boundaries. About, look, I'm trying to be civil here. You threaten me with legal action. I kept my voice level, curious. That seems like an odd way to be civil. Unless there's something you think I know. Something you're worried I might act on. His left hand twitched. Just the slightest tremor, there and gone. His pupils dilated fractionally. The micro-expression of contempt flickered across his face, upper lip curling almost imperceptibly, before he caught it. He was rattled. He'd come over here expecting an easy target, a broken man he could cow with his presence and verbal superiority. Instead, I was asking questions. Simple questions that made him explain himself. The observers were shifting uncomfortably now. This wasn't going how they'd expected. I don't think you know anything, Julian said louder now. I think you're a washed-up investigator who can't accept that his wife found someone better. I'm giving you a reality check, Mark. You're not the big shot anymore. You're just a guy who teaches community college courses and drinks alone at charity events. There it was, the mask slipping. When verbal dominance fails, people like Julian escalate to personal attacks. It's a defensive reaction, an attempt to regain control through cruelty. I didn't respond. I just watched him, my expression unchanged. And that silence, that refusal to engage with his anger, made him angrier. You think you're so smart, he hissed, stepping closer. You think those FBI tricks work in the real world? I've destroyed careers of people much more impressive than you. Have you? I asked softly. You're right, I have. By winning cases legitimately? Or through other means? His face went very still. What is that supposed to mean? It's a simple question. He got in my face then, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne, trying to use his physical presence to dominate me, to make me back down. His voice dropped to a harsh whisper, meant only for me. Listen to me very carefully, you pathetic has-been. I will destroy what's left of your sad little life. I will file complaints with every organization you're affiliated with. I will make sure no one ever hires you to teach again. I will audit every word of that textbook and find grounds to sue you. I will make you wish you'd never. That's when I shifted. It's hard to describe what happens when you stop being a regular person and become an interrogator. It's a mental switch, a physical transformation. My posture changed, not aggressive, but utterly still, utterly focused. My voice dropped into the register I'd used in the room, the tone that had made hardened criminals uncomfortable. Julian, I said quietly. Did you know that an anonymous file was delivered to the State Bar Association this morning, along with a duplicate to the district attorney's office? He froze. Actually froze, his body going rigid. The file contains some interesting documentation. Bank records, witness statements, communication logs. It details a pattern of behavior spanning several of your most high-profile cases. The color was draining from his face. Let me tell you about one case in particular, I continued, my voice calm and measured, loud enough now for the crowd to hear. Marcus Delacroix. Criminal trial, 3 years ago. Your client walked free after the prosecution's star witness recanted her testimony on the stand. Do you remember that case, Julian? He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. He was staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. I began to mirror his body language, a rapport-building technique. Matched his stance, his breathing pattern. Then I shifted deliberately into cold analysis mode. My posture became more rigid, my gaze more direct. The witness's name is Sandra Cho. On March 15th, 3 years ago, she received a wire transfer of $200,000 to an offshore account. The money was laundered through shell companies, but the trail leads back to a trust you benefit from. In exchange for this payment, Ms. Cho changed her testimony, allowing a guilty man to go free. Julian's breathing was shallow now. His left hand was shaking visibly, that tremor I'd seen earlier, now uncontrolled. The micro-expression you're displaying right now is contempt mixed with fear, I continued, my voice taking on a lecturing quality. That slight curl of your upper lip, the asymmetric contraction of your facial muscles. It's involuntary, impossible to fake or suppress. It means you're simultaneously disgusted that you're being called out and terrified of the consequences. The crowd was dead silent now. Every eye was on us. That tremor in your left hand, that's a stress response. Your sympathetic nervous system activating. Fight or flight. Your pupils are dilated, your breathing shallow and rapid. You're experiencing acute anxiety because you know in this moment that I have evidence of your corruption. I took a half step closer, maintaining eye contact. You see, Julian, you think intimidation is about being loud. About making threats. About using legal jargon to confuse and cow people. But true intimidation isn't about volume or vocabulary. True intimidation is about knowing a man's deepest secret and letting him watch you hold the key. His phone rang. The sound was jarring in the silence. He fumbled for it, his hands shaking, and I saw his face go even paler as he read the screen. That's probably your law partner, I said calmly. I imagine he's calling about the complaint that was filed with the Bar Association this morning. The one detailing your history of witness tampering, evidence of bribery, and obstruction of justice across multiple cases. Julian answered the phone, his voice hoarse. What? No, he listened, and I watched his entire body sag. I don't know how, I can't talk right now. Across the room, a reporter's phone buzzed. Then another. The news was breaking in real time. I continued, my voice never rising above conversational volume. The Delacroix case is just one example, Julian. There's also the Henderson case from 2 years ago. The witness you intimidated into silence, a 19-year-old college student who saw your client commit a serious crime. You had photos from her private social media, photos she didn't even know existed. You threatened to send them to her parents, her university. She disappeared rather than testify. Stop, he whispered. And then there's the Morrison case. Your client was a repeat offender, multiple charges. You got him off through questionable means with the evidence chain. That client went on to harm 2 more people within 6 months. One of them nearly died. Please. The evidence in that file is comprehensive, Julian. It's the kind of case I used to build for federal prosecutors. Bank records showing payments. Recorded statements from witnesses. Communications traced through intermediaries. It's not circumstantial. It's not ambiguous. It's proof. He stumbled backward, his confidence completely shattered. The great Julian Thorne, who dominated countless courtrooms, who'd intimidated prosecutors and witnesses with his presence and rhetoric, was falling apart in front of 50 of the city's most influential people. Because he wasn't being shouted at. He wasn't being threatened. He was being dissected piece by someone who understood exactly how psychological pressure worked. The fascinating thing about your tells, I said, now speaking more to the crowd than to him, is how consistent they are. That hand tremor, that showed up every time you were being deceptive in court. I pulled video from your trials. Every time you were concealing something, protecting a fabrication, that left hand trembled. But you were so confident, so focused on your performance, that you never noticed. More phones were buzzing now. The reporter was typing frantically. Chloe stood frozen, her face a mask of horror. The contempt micro-expression that appeared whenever you spoke about the justice system, about ethics, about the law. Because deep down, you hold all of it in contempt. You see the system as something to be manipulated, not served. And that contempt leaked through in involuntary facial movements that lasted fractions of a second. Movements I was trained to see. Julian's phone rang again. Then again. His face was ashen, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped the phone. He looked around at the crowd, at the reporters, at Chloe, and I saw the moment he realized his entire life was collapsing. "You thought you were untouchable," I said quietly. "You thought your intelligence and verbal ability made you immune to consequences. But the thing about being a successful deceiver is that you start to believe your own performance. You forget that there are people who've spent their entire careers learning to see through performances." He tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He was having a full panic response now, his body betraying him completely. "The Bar Association will begin their investigation within 48 hours, I continued. "The DA's office is already reviewing the evidence. I imagine you'll be hearing from them quite soon. The charges will likely include witness tampering, obstruction of justice, bribery, and conspiracy. Given the number of cases involved and the severity of the outcomes after you fraudulently secured freedom for your clients, you're looking at significant prison time." "I'll fight this," he managed to croak out. I'll. "You'll lose," I said simply. "Because unlike your usual opponents, I didn't give you anything to manipulate. I didn't make procedural errors. I didn't rely on witnesses you could intimidate or evidence you could contaminate. I built a case using the same techniques I used against organized crime figures and terrorists. And I did it while you thought I was just a washed-up instructor writing a book nobody would read." His law partner called again, then someone who was probably his crisis management attorney. The room had erupted in whispered conversations, phones out, the story spreading in real time through text messages and social media. Chloe finally moved, reaching for Julian's arm, but he shook her off. He looked at her with something like hatred, not for her, but for himself, for the situation, for the complete destruction of everything he'd built. "You have about an hour before this breaks publicly," I told him. "I'd suggest you use that time to call a very good attorney. Not one of your colleagues. They'll abandon you once they realize you're toxic. You'll need someone from outside your circle, someone who specializes in defending attorneys accused of corruption. I understand. Those cases are quite difficult. The juries tend to be unsympathetic." I turned to walk away, then paused and looked back at him. "Oh, and Julian, that textbook I'm writing? Chapter 12 is about reading deception in high-stakes environments. I'm thinking of including a case study about a defense attorney who became so confident in his own abilities that he forgot the fundamental rule of deception. Everyone has tells. Everyone. I won't use your name, of course, but the people who matter will know." I walked away as his phone rang again, as the crowd descended into chaos, as the great Julian Thorne stood trembling in the middle of the Hastings Gallery, watching his entire world dissolve. Chloe called me 3 days later. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, rambling, panicked, asking how I could have done this to her, to them. She didn't understand. She still thought this was about her, about the divorce, about wounded pride. It wasn't. It had never been about her. It was about justice. About a man who'd corrupted the system for profit and gotten away with it for years because everyone was too intimidated by his intelligence and status to look closely. That's what people don't understand about interrogation, about investigation. It's not personal. It's professional. You find the truth, you document it, you present it, and you let the system do its work. Julian Thorne was disbarred within 6 months. The Bar Association's investigation uncovered even more corruption than I'd documented, patterns of behavior going back nearly 15 years. The DA brought criminal charges, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, bribery, conspiracy. His trial lasted 4 months. I didn't attend, but I followed in the news. They said he was a shadow of himself on the stand. His famous eloquence had abandoned him. He stammered, contradicted himself, showed all the signs of deception that I'd documented. The jury took 3 hours to convict on all counts. He's serving 12 years in federal prison now. Not enough, considering what he did, but more than people like him usually get. Chloe tried to salvage her social standing, but was impossible. She'd tied her identity so completely to Julian's success that when he fell, she fell with him. The exciting life she'd craved collapsed into scandal. The society friends disappeared. She moved back to her hometown somewhere in the Midwest. I heard she's working in real estate now. I don't think about her much. I don't think about Julian much either, except when I'm teaching. The Anatomy of Truth was published 14 months after the gallery incident. It became a bestseller in its field, used in law enforcement academies, corporate training programs, intelligence agencies. I've been invited to lecture at universities and conferences around the world. Last week, I gave a talk to a packed auditorium at the National Law Enforcement Training Center. 200 investigators, analysts, and officers, all eager to learn about reading deception and conducting effective interrogations. I told them about a case study, anonymous, of course, of a defense attorney who'd corrupted the system for years through witness tampering and bribery. I showed them video clips of his courtroom performances, slowed down to highlight the tells, the hand tremor, the micro-expressions, the patterns of body language that revealed his deceptions. The key, I told them, is understanding that deception is exhausting. It requires constant monitoring, constant adjustment. The more confident a deceiver becomes, the more likely they are to slip. They start to believe their own performance, and that's when the involuntary signals emerge. I showed them the moment at the gallery when Julian realized he'd been caught. The color draining from his face, the tremor becoming uncontrollable, the complete psychological collapse of a man who believed himself untouchable. True power, I said, isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's not about intimidation or verbal dominance. True power is about knowing the truth, documenting it, understanding it, and having the patience to present it at exactly the right moment. The audience was silent, absorbed. This subject thought he was the smartest person in every room. He'd built a career on that assumption. But intelligence isn't the same as wisdom. Verbal agility isn't the same as truth. And no amount of charisma can protect you from someone who actually knows how to read human behavior. After the lecture, a young investigator approached me, maybe 26, eager, idealistic. "That case study," she said. "The attorney. That was Julian Thorne, wasn't it?" I smiled. I couldn't possibly comment on that. But if it was, I just want to say, that took incredible patience. To build that case, to wait for the right moment. Most people would have confronted him immediately. Patience is the most important skill in this work, I told her. People think interrogation is about pressure, about pushing someone until they break. But real interrogation is about creating a space where the truth becomes inevitable. You can't rush that. You have to be willing to wait, to observe, to let the subject believe they're safe until the moment you show them they never were. She nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. The hard part isn't finding the truth, I continued. The hard part is controlling your own reactions. Your anger, your desire for immediate satisfaction. If you let emotion drive you, you make mistakes. You tip your hand too early. You give the subject room to maneuver. So you just stayed calm, even though he'd taken your wife. He didn't take anything, I said. He did me a favor. He showed me that the life I thought I wanted, the status, the recognition, the performance, wasn't what I needed. What I needed was work that mattered. Time to think. Space to write. A chance to pass on what I'd learned to people who might use it to actually make a difference. I gestured around the auditorium. This is what matters. Teaching the next generation to see through deception, to find truth, to serve justice. That's real power. Not headlines or high-profile cases or impressive courtroom speeches. Just the quiet, persistent work of making the system function the way it's supposed to. She smiled. Your ex-wife must regret leaving you. I doubt it, I said honestly. She wanted excitement, drama, status. She got all of that, at least for a while. The fact that it ended badly doesn't mean it wasn't what she wanted. But you won. I considered that. I don't think of it as winning. I think of it as finding equilibrium. Julian Thorne broke the law. He corrupted the justice system. He enabled harm for profit. Those actions had consequences. I simply documented those actions and presented the evidence. The system did the rest. But it must have felt good when he fell apart in front of everyone. No, I said quietly. It felt necessary. There's a difference. And that's the truth. I didn't enjoy watching Julian's public destruction. I didn't take pleasure in his conviction or his imprisonment. Those things were necessary outcomes of his choices, but they weren't victories to celebrate. What I do celebrate is this: the system worked. A corrupt attorney was held accountable. The witnesses he'd intimidated can sleep better now. The victims of the criminals he'd freed have some measure of justice. And me? I'm doing work I love. Teaching, writing, consulting on cases where my expertise can make a difference. I live in my quiet townhouse. I run on Saturday mornings. I spend my evenings working on my next book. Chloe thought I'd lost my edge when I retired. She thought the quiet life meant I'd surrendered, that I'd stopped being formidable. She was wrong. I didn't lose anything. I just stopped performing. Because here's what I learned in 23 years of breaking some of the most dangerous people in the world. Real power isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't need an audience or applause. Real power is silent. It's patient. It's the ability to see what others miss, to understand what others ignore, to wait for exactly the right moment to act. Julian Thorne thought intimidation was about volume and vocabulary. He thought dominance was about physical presence and verbal agility. He was wrong. And by the time he realized it, it was far too late. The pen, it turns out, really is mightier than the gavel. Especially when you know exactly where to strike. Please like, comment, and share. If this is your first time watching my video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you'll be notified whenever I post a new story.